You will be billed for your portion of the Serenity Meadows Grand Entrance Beautification Project. Your mandatory special assessment is $32,000, due in 30 days. That was the line that started it all. I read the letter again, the stiff, embossed letterhead feeling absurdly important under my callous thumb. Serenity Meadows. The name itself was a joke, a marketing gimmick plastered on a soulless expanse of beige houses that had sprouted up next to my family's land like a fungal bloom. My name is Arthur, and I'm a civil engineer. For 30 years, my world was rebar, load-bearing calculations, and the precise, unyielding logic of concrete and steel. I built bridges, things that connected people, things that were meant to last. Then, my wife, Eleanor, passed away, and my own foundation cracked right down the middle. The big city house we'd shared felt like a mausoleum overnight. Every room echoed with her absence. So I did the only thing that made sense. I ran. I packed up my life, sold the echo-filled house, and retreated to the one place that had ever felt truly permanent, my grandfather's homestead. It wasn't much. A small, sturdy house he'd built with his own hands, sitting on 5 acres of stubborn North Carolina soil. It was the only piece of land for miles that wasn't owned by the Serenity Meadows developer. It was an island of old-growth oaks and memories in a sea of manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. I came here seeking peace. I wanted to hear crickets, not traffic. I wanted to watch the sun set without it disappearing behind another new condo building. I wanted to be left alone. Apparently, that was too much to ask. My introduction to the Homeowners Association came a week after I moved in the form of a woman who moved with the stiff, self-important gait of a parade commander. Her name was Brenda, and her smile was as artificial as the silk flowers flanking the entrance she was so proud of. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she'd chirped, handing me a wicker basket overflowing with pamphlets and a bottle of cheap, syrupy wine. I thanked her, trying to be neighborly. "Technically, I'm not in the neighborhood," I said, gesturing to my property line, clearly marked by an old stone wall my great-grandfather had built. My land was never part of the development tract. Brenda's smile tightened, a barely perceptible twitch. "Oh, we consider everyone here part of the community," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension that set my teeth on edge. "And as part of the community, you'll be expected to adhere to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It's all in the welcome packet. It keeps our property values high." I glanced at the packet. It was thicker than the schematics for a suspension bridge. I knew then that my quiet retirement was going to be a lot more complicated than I'd planned. I was an independent nation, and she had just handed me a demand for annexation. For a few months, the conflict was cold, a series of passive-aggressive notes left on my door. My grass was a quarter-inch too long. The color of my trim was not an approved earth tone. My perfectly functional, slightly rusty 1988 Ford pickup was a derelict vehicle and had to be stored out of sight. I ignored them. My property, my rules. I wasn't a member of her beige cult. I hadn't signed any covenants. Her authority ended at my stone wall. She didn't see it that way. In her mind, her power was absolute, a radiant aura of control that extended wherever her gaze fell. My quiet defiance was an act of rebellion she could not tolerate. It was a crack in the perfect facade of her suburban fiefdom. Which brought me back to the letter. $32,000. For an entrance. An entrance that, according to the crude map included in the notice, was going to be built on the far corner of my land. They weren't just annexing me. They were seizing territory. And not just any territory. That corner of the property, shaded by the oldest oak tree, was where my grandfather was buried. There was no fancy tombstone, just a simple, hand-carved piece of granite with his name, a date, and the words, "Home at last." It was a family plot, a quiet, sacred space. Brenda and her HOA didn't just want my money. They wanted to pave over my grandfather's grave to build a monument to their own vanity, complete with gurgling fountains and pretentious gas lamps. The peace I had come here seeking evaporated. The quiet grief I was nursing for my wife curdled into a cold, hard rage. They had mistaken my desire for solitude as weakness. They had mistaken my silence for submission. I was a man who built things to last. Brenda was about to find out that I was just as good at tearing things down. She had started a war, and I was going to finish it with the methodical, devastating precision of a controlled demolition. My first step was simple. It was the engineer's way. Verify the data. I went to my workshop, a detached garage that smelled of sawdust and motor oil, and pulled out the tools of my trade. Not wrenches and drills, but my professional surveying equipment. A state-of-the-art total station, GPS receivers, and my old, worn leather satchel full of maps and deeds. For 2 days, I did nothing but walk my land. I found the original survey markers, iron pins driven into the earth over a century ago. I cross-referenced them with the county plat maps, my grandfather's deed, and the developer's own filings. The digital readout on my equipment confirmed what I already knew in my bones. The line was exactly where the old stone wall stood. The quarter-acre they planned to seize for their grand entrance was mine. Undeniably, legally, and historically mine. Armed with irrefutable proof, I opted for the civil approach first. It was the last time I would make that mistake. I drafted a polite, concise letter. I enclosed a certified copy of my survey map, highlighting the property lines in yellow. I explained that the land was not only private property but also a family cemetery, protected under state law. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. I was giving her a chance to retreat gracefully. A chance to admit a mistake had been made and to back off. Brenda's response came not in a letter, but in person. She rolled up to my driveway in a golf cart that looked more like a miniature tank, a tiny Serenity Meadows security flag flapping arrogantly from its antenna. She didn't get out. She just sat there, sunglasses hiding her eyes, and honked. I walked out onto my porch, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. "We received your letter," she said, the word dripping with disdain, as if it were a piece of garbage I'd left on her lawn. "Then you know there's been a mistake," I said, keeping my voice level. "The only mistake, Arthur, is your belief that those old papers mean anything." She waved a dismissive hand. "The community's needs supersede your dusty old maps. We need a proper entrance. That corner of your property is an overgrown eyesore. We'll be improving it." "You'll be trespassing," I corrected her. "And you'll be desecrating a grave. That's a felony." She actually laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "A grave? That old rock. Please. Don't be so dramatic. It's a blight. We're doing you a favor. The new entrance will increase your property value." "My property isn't for sale, and its value is none of your concern," I said, my patience cracking like cheap concrete. "Stay off my land, Brenda. This is your only warning." Her smile vanished. "You don't get to give me warnings. I am the president of this board. You will receive another bill for the assessment, with late fees applied. And if you try to interfere with the construction crew, I will have you removed." She spun the golf cart around, kicking up gravel, and zipped away. The tiny flag waved a final, smug goodbye. The escalation began the next day. A notice was posted on the community bulletin board, which I could see from my driveway. It was a thinly veiled attack, warning residents about uncooperative landowners who were hindering the progress and beautification of our community. My house, my truck, my very existence were framed as a threat to their collective investment. Then came the official harassment. An HOA security car, another glorified golf cart with a flashing yellow light, began parking just across my property line, its occupant staring at my house for hours. It was a pathetic attempt at intimidation, meant to make me feel watched, to make me feel like the outsider. Fines started appearing in my mailbox, tucked into cheerful pink envelopes. Fines for unapproved landscaping, my wife's old rose bushes, improper vehicle storage, my pickup, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain aesthetic harmony with the community. They were inventing violations, building a paper trail to paint me as a nuisance. I filed every notice in a folder labeled Evidence. I started talking to my neighbors. Not the Serenity Meadows residents, but the few other old-timers who, like me, lived on the periphery. One of them was Frank, a retired police detective who had seen every kind of human ugliness. He lived a half-mile down the road in a house as old as mine. I found him on his porch, cleaning a shotgun. He listened to my story without interruption, his face a mask of weary resignation. "Brenda," he said, shaking his head. "She's a piece of work. A petty tyrant who gets off on control. Thinks that HOA presidency makes her queen of the world. She's threatening to build on my land, I said. On my grandfather's grave. Frank stopped cleaning the gun and looked me straight in the eye. His gaze was sharp, analytical. Documentation, Arthur. Document everything. Every letter, every fine, every visit from her little toy cop. Get a camera. A good one. Aim it at that corner of your property. Video doesn't lie. I'm a surveyor, I told him. My profession is documenting reality. But I'm not sure that's enough. She seems to think reality is whatever she says it is. Then you have to create a reality she can't ignore, he said, a grim smile touching his lips. You have to make her overplay her hand. People like that, they always do. Their ego is a liability. You just have to give it a nice, hard push. I took his advice. That afternoon, I went online and ordered 4 high-resolution, weatherproof, night vision-capable security cameras. I wasn't just going to document. I was going to build a trap. While I waited for the cameras to arrive, I dove deeper into the paperwork. My engineering background had trained me to see the world as a system of interconnected parts. A building, a bridge, a community, they all had a blueprint. I just had to find the blueprint for Serenity Meadows. I spent hours at the county records office, a place that smelled of dust and decaying paper. I pulled the developer's original plans, the HOA's articles of incorporation, the minutes from every board meeting for the past 5 years. I read it all, my eyes scanning for weaknesses, for inconsistencies, for the hairline fracture that could bring the whole structure down. And then I found it. It was buried in the legal description of the land transferred from the developer to the HOA, the land designated as common areas. The language was dense, full of arcane surveying terms. But to me, it was as clear as a blueprint. The description for the parcel adjacent to my property was flawed. It referenced a point of beginning at a stamped brass monument. I knew every survey marker in a 10-mile radius. That monument didn't exist. It had never existed. The developer's surveyor had made a mistake, a critical, foundational error. What it meant was that the HOA didn't have a clear title to the land they were managing. The very ground their precious clubhouse stood on was in a state of legal limbo. But it got better. I cross-referenced the HOA's financial disclosures with the state's business registry. Brenda's husband owned a landscaping company. A small, barely solvent operation, according to their public filings. Yet, Serenity Landscaping LLC had been awarded every major contract for the HOA's upkeep for the last 3 years. The new entrance project, a massive 6-figure job, had been awarded to them without a single competing bid. Brenda wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a crook. She was using the HOA as her personal piggy bank, funneling resident dues directly into her family's pockets. The grand entrance wasn't about beautification. It was about a $32,000 payday from me, and who knew how much more from everyone else. This changed everything. This was no longer a property dispute. It was a criminal investigation, and I was the lead investigator. The rage in my chest cooled, replaced by something colder, sharper. The focused calm of a professional with a job to do. The turning point, the moment that solidified my resolve, came on a Tuesday morning. I was woken by the roar of heavy machinery. I ran outside, my heart pounding in my chest. A bulldozer was sitting at the edge of my property. A work crew in bright yellow vests was unloading equipment. And standing there, pointing, directing, was Brenda. I sprinted across the lawn, waving my arms. "Get off my property!" I yelled. A burly foreman intercepted me. "Lady says this is HOA land. We got a work order." "The lady is wrong," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "This is private land. You are trespassing." Brenda strode over, a smirk plastered on her face. "The work has been approved by the board, Arthur. You are interfering. If you don't go back to your house, I'll have you arrested." As she spoke, the bulldozer operator, either through carelessness or malice, lowered his blade. It scraped across the ground, catching the edge of my grandfather's simple granite headstone. The stone, which had stood for 50 years, tipped and fell with a sickening thud. Something inside me snapped. The world went red at the edges. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I just stared at the overturned stone, then looked at Brenda. The smirk was gone from her face, replaced by a flicker of something, maybe not fear, but a dawning realization that she had crossed a line she didn't even know existed. "You're done," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "The work stops now. Get your machine off my land. Get off my land. All of you." The foreman looked from me to Brenda, uncertainty clouding his face. "We're not going anywhere," Brenda snapped, recovering her bravado. "Get back to work." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I'd like to report a case of criminal trespass and desecration of a human grave," I said calmly into the phone, giving my address. I never took my eyes off Brenda. Her face paled. Desecrating a grave wasn't a fine. It was prison time. The game had changed. The pieces were in motion. This was no longer about offense or a fee. It was about justice. My plan, which I had started to call Project Cornerstone, officially moved from the planning phase to execution. The first phase was simple: let the enemy build their own prison. My new cameras had arrived the day before. That afternoon, after the sheriff's deputy had come and gone, leaving a wake of confusion and stalled work, I installed them. I placed them discreetly in the high branches of the old oaks, their lenses perfectly positioned to cover the disputed corner of land, my driveway, and my front porch. They were hardwired to a server in my basement, recording every second in crystal clear 4K. Then, I drafted a new letter. This one wasn't polite. It was a formal cease and desist, written with the help of an online legal template. It cited the specific state statutes for trespassing and grave desecration. It formally notified the HOA board that any further incursion onto my property would be met with immediate legal action, both civil and criminal. I sent a copy to every single member of the HOA board at their home addresses, again via certified mail. I was building a wall of evidence, brick by painstaking brick. Brenda's reaction was exactly what I had hoped for. She was a cornered animal, and she came out lashing. She called an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but my neighbor Frank was. He gave me a full report later that evening. According to Frank, Brenda painted me as a monster. A litigious, mentally unstable recluse who was trying to extort the community. She claimed my so-called grave was a fraud, a stunt I had concocted to stop the beautification project. She told the assembled residents that I was suing them all, and that they needed to fight back. She passed a motion to create a legal defense and project continuance fund. She asked for an immediate special assessment of $500 from every household to hire a big, expensive law firm to crush me. The motion passed. Most residents were too scared or too apathetic to vote against her. She was using their money to fight a war she had started. It was brilliant in its audacity. It was also a critical mistake. She was now spending community funds on a personal vendetta, and the paper trail would lead directly to her. The next morning, a team of lawyers in sharp suits arrived. They trampled over my property line, planting a large sign that read, "Future site of the Serenity Meadows Grand Entrance. A project of your HOA board." My cameras recorded it all. The lawyers ignoring my "no trespassing" signs. The smug looks on their faces. The triumphant posture of Brenda as she directed the sign's placement. I didn't confront them. I just sat in my office, watching the live feed on my monitor, and saved the video file. I labeled it "Trespass and Incrimination." The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. My first move was to go public. Not to the newspapers, not yet. I chose a more strategic venue, the monthly meeting of the County Planning and Zoning Board. I got myself on the agenda under New Business. When my turn came, I walked to the podium with a calm I didn't feel. I looked out at the board members, a collection of tired-looking local officials. Brenda was in the audience, flanked by her lawyers, a look of smug curiosity on her face. She had no idea what was coming. "Good evening," I began. "My name is Arthur. I'm a civil engineer, and I own the property at 121 Old Mill Road, adjacent to the Serenity Meadows development." I didn't talk about harassment or graves. I talked about their language. I talked about zoning, setbacks, and public records. I presented my certified survey, displayed on the overhead projector for all to see. I showed them the original development plan submitted by the builder. "As you can see," I said, pointing with a laser pen, the approved plans for Serenity Meadows show a 20-foot utility and conservation easement along my property line. This was a condition for the development's approval. It's supposed to remain undeveloped. Then I showed them the HOA's plans for their grand entrance. The HOA's proposed construction not only encroaches 10 feet onto my private property, but it completely obliterates this mandated easement. They are planning to build a permanent structure on land legally designated to remain clear. A murmur went through the room. One of the board members, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, leaned into her microphone. "Mister, are you saying the Serenity Meadows HOA submitted plans to build this structure without a permit?" "I'm not saying it, ma'am," I replied. "The public record is. I can find no permit application on file for this project. They appear to be proceeding with major construction, impacting a county easement, without any county oversight or approval." Brenda's lawyer shot to his feet. "This is a private property dispute. It has no place here." Mrs. Gable silenced him with a glare. "It is very much our place when it involves county easements and unpermitted construction. Sir," she said to me, "thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will be looking into this immediately." I simply nodded and returned to my seat. I had fired the first shot, and it had hit its mark. I hadn't made it personal. I had made it procedural. I had turned Brenda's beloved rules and regulations against her. Brenda was furious. She stormed out of the meeting, her lawyers trailing behind her like pilot fish. She had come expecting to see me humiliated. Instead, she had been publicly questioned by the very authorities she relied on to enforce her will. The next day, a county inspector visited the site. A large, red, stop work order was slapped onto the sign the lawyers had planted on my land. The notice cited unpermitted construction and encroachment on a county easement. It was a small victory, but a significant one. I had used the system to put a halt to her plans. But I knew it was only temporary. Brenda wasn't the type to give up. She was the type to double down. Her reaction was swift and vicious. The HOA's lawyers filed a lawsuit against me. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction. It accused me of harassment, of deliberately interfering with a community project, and of filing a frivolous complaint with the county to cause financial harm to the association. It was a slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed to bleed me dry, to bury me in legal fees until I gave up. Brenda was trying to turn my own tactic against me, to use the weight of the legal system to crush me. But the lawsuit was another gift. As part of the discovery process, my lawyer, a shrewd, sharp-witted woman named Helen whom I'd hired on Frank's recommendation, could now legally demand access to all of the HOA's records. Meeting minutes, financial statements, contracts, emails. Everything. Brenda had just handed me the key to her kingdom. While Helen prepared the discovery requests, Brenda escalated her personal attacks. She took to the community's private Facebook page. She posted a picture of my house, calling it a dilapidated shack that was dragging down property values. She posted a picture of my old truck, calling it an environmental hazard. Then she crossed a line that even I hadn't anticipated. She posted about my wife. She didn't use Eleanor's name. She was too clever for that. But she wrote a long, rambling post about the importance of community standards, and how unstable individuals, often dealing with personal tragedy, could become a danger to the neighborhood. She hinted at mental instability, at grief-fueled paranoia. She was trying to paint me as a crazy old man, a ticking time bomb who needed to be dealt with. Reading those words, seeing her twist my private grief into a weapon against me, was like a physical blow. The cold, methodical engineer vanished, and for a moment, all that was left was a grieving husband. She was dancing on two graves now. My grandfather's and my wife's. Frank saw the post and called me immediately. "Don't respond, Arthur. Not a word. That's what she wants. She wants to bait you into an emotional reaction she can use against you. Screenshot it. Save it. Add it to the file." He was right. My anger was a liability. My focus was my strength. I took a deep breath, captured the image, and saved it in a new folder, defamation. A few days later, a package arrived on my doorstep. It was a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a single, typewritten note: "She did the same thing to our father." Don't let her get away with it. I plugged the drive into my computer. It was a treasure trove. It contained scanned copies of financial records, emails, and legal documents from a company called O'Connell Construction. There were 2 sets of books. One showed a thriving business. The other showed a business bleeding money, on the verge of bankruptcy. There were emails between Brenda and her husband, discussing how to hide profits and siphon funds. And there was a copy of a will. Her father's will. It clearly stated that his construction company was to be split equally between his 2 children, Brenda and David O'Connell. But there was another document. A signed agreement, dated a week after her father's death, in which David signed over his entire share of the company to Brenda for the sum of $1. David's signature looked wrong. It was shaky, forced. I suddenly understood. Brenda hadn't just cheated the HOA. She had cheated her own brother out of his inheritance. The note, the flash drive, it had to be from him. He was the whistleblower. I looked up David O'Connell online. It took me a while, but I found him. He was living 2 states away, working as a handyman. I found a phone number and, with a deep sense of trepidation, I called it. A weary voice answered on the 3rd ring. "Is this David O'Connell?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Who's asking?" "My name is Arthur." "I think you sent me a package." Another silence. Then, a sigh. "What does she want now?" "She wants my land," I said. "And I think she's using the same playbook she used on you." For the next hour, David told me his story. How after their father died, Brenda had presented him with a mountain of fabricated debt and fraudulent financial statements showing the company was worthless. She'd told him that if he didn't sign it over to her, they would both be ruined by creditors. He was young, grieving, and knew nothing about business. He trusted his big sister. He signed. It was only years later that he discovered the truth. By then, it was too late. The statute of limitations had passed. He had no money for lawyers. Brenda told him if he ever came back, if he ever told anyone, she would ruin him. "The signature on that document," I said. "Was it forged?" "No," David said, his voice thick with shame. "It's mine. She had a different last page. The one I signed was an agreement to hire an auditor. She must have swapped the signature page onto the transfer document. I never saw it coming. Fraud. Forgery. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. The HOA dispute was just a symptom of a much deeper disease. Brenda's entire life was built on a foundation of lies and theft. "David," I said, my voice firm. "The statute of limitations for a single act of fraud may have passed. But if she used a company obtained through fraud to commit new crimes, like, say, embezzling from a homeowners association, that creates a pattern of criminal activity. It's called racketeering. And the statute of limitations for that is much, much longer." I heard him take a sharp breath on the other end of the line. For the first time, there was a spark of hope in his voice. You think you can get her?" "I think we can," I said. "But I need your help. I need you to be willing to testify." He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the years of fear and resentment warring within him. "She took everything from me, Arthur," he said finally. "My father's legacy. My name. Yeah. I'll testify. Just tell me what you need." The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. I had her on property law violations. I had her on civil harassment and defamation. And now, thanks to her brother, I had her on multiple felonies. This was no longer a job for a local lawyer or a county zoning board. This was a case for the state. I spent the next week compiling what I called the Brenda File. It was my masterpiece, the culmination of all my research, my surveillance, and my grief-fueled rage, all distilled into a cold, logical, undeniable case. I organized everything into tabbed sections. Tab A, Property Dispute, contained my certified survey, the county plat maps, and high-resolution photos of my grandfather's grave, both before and after the bulldozer incident. Tab B, Harassment and Trespass, contained every fine, every threatening letter, and time-stamped video clips from my security cameras showing HOA security, Brenda, and her lawyers repeatedly entering my property. Tab C, Procedural violations included the minutes from HOA meetings, the stop work order from the county, and proof that the entrance project had no permits and violated the county easement. Tab D, defamation, held the screenshots from the community Facebook page, including her vile post about my wife. And finally, the crown jewel, Tab E, financial crimes. This section contained David O'Connell's sworn affidavit, copies of the 2 sets of books for the construction company, the fraudulent transfer document, and a detailed analysis I had prepared, cross-referencing the HOA's payments to Serenity Landscaping with the inflated, no-bid contracts. I created a flow chart that showed, with devastating clarity, how the residents' dues flowed into Brenda's pocket. When I was finished, I had a 4-inch thick binder of pure, unadulterated legal dynamite. I didn't take it to the local police. Frank advised against it. Local departments could be slow, under-resourced, and sometimes susceptible to local influence. Brenda was a big fish in a small pond. No, this required a bigger boat. I made an appointment with the State Attorney General's office, specifically their Economic Crimes Unit. I walked into the imposing state government building wearing my best suit, the binder tucked under my arm like a weapon. I was met by a young, sharp-eyed prosecutor and a seasoned investigator with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. I didn't give them a speech. I didn't get emotional. I simply opened the binder on the table and said, I'd like to report a series of crimes. For 2 hours, I walked them through it. Page by page, tab by tab. I presented the evidence logically, chronologically, just as if I were presenting a structural analysis report. I let the facts speak for themselves. When I was done, the 2 men were silent. The investigator picked up David's affidavit, reading it again. The prosecutor stared at the flow chart I'd made, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Mister," the prosecutor said, finally breaking the silence, "you've done our job for us. This is one of the most well-documented civilian complaints I have ever seen." The investigator nodded. "Racketeering, wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery, embezzlement, she's looking at a decade, maybe more." He looked at me with a newfound respect. "You said you're a civil engineer." "Yes," I said. "You ever think about a career change?" he asked with a slight grin. They took my binder. They told me not to speak to anyone about the investigation. They said they would be in touch. As I left the building and stepped back out into the sunlight, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The wheels of a much larger, more powerful machine were now turning. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to watch it run Brenda over. The perfect moment presented itself 2 weeks later. Brenda, emboldened by my silence and unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, decided it was time for the kill shot. She called a special, community-wide HOA meeting. The agenda was simple: a vote to authorize a massive, 6-figure line of credit to fund the lawsuit against me and to overcome the bureaucratic obstacles, i.e., the stop work order, holding up the grand entrance project. She was asking the community to go into debt to finance her crimes. It was the peak of her arrogance, the final, fatal act of hubris. Frank called me as soon as the meeting notice went up. "This is it, Arthur. This is the stage." I contacted the investigator from the AG's office. I told him the time and place of the meeting. He just said, "We'll be there. Just make sure you get the floor." The meeting was held in the Serenity Meadows clubhouse, a room with beige walls, beige carpet, and all the charm of a dentist's waiting room. It was packed. Brenda sat at a long table at the front, flanked by her lawyer and the other board members, who looked like nervous hostages. I walked in with Frank by my side and took a seat in the back row. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. My presence was unexpected. Brenda shot me a look of pure hatred, but it was tinged with triumph. She thought I had come to beg, to witness her final victory. She ran through the meeting with brisk, authoritarian efficiency. When she got to the main agenda item, she gave a passionate speech, her voice quivering with faux indignation. She spoke of outside agitators and threats to our way of life. She painted herself as the brave defender of their property values. "He wants to drag us through years of costly litigation," she thundered, pointing a finger directly at me. "But we will not be intimidated. We will not be bullied. Tonight, you will vote to give your board the resources we need to fight back and to build the beautiful entrance this community deserves." When she finished, there was a smattering of applause, mostly from a few of her known cronies. "Are there any questions before the vote?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to speak. Slowly, I raised my hand. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Yes, Arthur. Do you have something to say?" "I do," I said, standing up and walking slowly toward the front of the room. I carried a small projector and my laptop. "I believe the residents should have all the relevant information before they vote to go into debt." Her lawyer stood up. "We will not allow this meeting to be turned into a circus. He is the subject of pending litigation." "Oh, I'm not going to talk about the lawsuit," I said, setting up the projector. "I'm going to talk about fraud." A gasp went through the room. Brenda's face went white. Before she could stop me, I had the first image on the screen behind her, my certified survey map next to her unpermitted construction plan. "This is the project you're being asked to fund," I said, my voice ringing with clarity in the silent room. "A project that is partially on my land, and partially on a county easement they don't have permission to build on. Which is why they have a stop work order." I clicked to the next slide. It was a high-definition still from my security camera, showing the bulldozer knocking over my grandfather's headstone. "This is what the HOA board calls beautification," I said quietly. The mood in the room shifted from tension to horror. "This is slander," Brenda shrieked. "It's all lies." "Facts aren't slander, Brenda," I said calmly, and clicked again. The next slide was the flow chart. The one showing the money trail. From the HOA bank account, through the no-bid contracts, to Serenity Landscaping, to a bank account in her husband's name. "For the last 3 years," I explained, "your president has been using this HOA as a personal ATM. She has embezzled over $200,000 of your money, funneled through her husband's company. The grand entrance isn't about property values. It's the biggest score of them all." The room erupted. People were shouting, pointing, demanding answers. Brenda's board members looked like they wanted the beige carpet to swallow them whole. "He's a liar," Brenda screamed, her voice cracking. "He can't prove any of that." "Actually," I said, looking toward the back of the room. "He can." Standing in the doorway was David O'Connell. Brenda froze. The color drained from her face. She looked at her brother as if she had seen a ghost. "Hello, sis," David said, his voice steady. "Remember me?" That was the moment she completely and utterly broke. It was a sight to behold. Her mask of cool authority shattered into a million pieces. "You," she shrieked, her voice a raw, ragged thing. "You were always jealous. A pathetic failure. I did what I had to do. I built all of this. It was owed to me." It was a full confession, screamed in front of 100 witnesses. And that's when the two men from the back of the room stood up. The investigator and the prosecutor from the AG's office. They walked calmly to the front, their badges displayed. "Brenda O'Connell," the investigator said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, her eyes found mine. They were filled with a venomous, impotent rage. "You'll regret this," she hissed, as they led her away. "I will destroy you." But her threats were hollow. The air in the room had changed. The fear she had cultivated for so long had vanished, replaced by a profound, collective sense of liberation. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Brenda gone, the rest of the HOA board resigned in disgrace. A new, interim board was appointed, made up of decent, reasonable people who had been too intimidated to speak up before. The ridiculous lawsuit against me was immediately dropped. The contract for the grand entrance was cancelled. The new board issued a formal, public apology to me on behalf of the entire community. Brenda's case never made it to trial. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had compiled and the testimony of her own brother, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. The court ordered full restitution to the HOA, forcing her to liquidate every asset she had. Her house, her cars, her precious Serenity Landscaping, it was all sold off to pay back the people she had stolen from. She lost everything. The community began to heal. The oppressive atmosphere of suspicion lifted. The new board went through the thick book of covenants and, with the overwhelming support of the residents, slashed most of the petty, vindictive rules Brenda had implemented. People started planting the flowers they wanted, painting their doors the colors they liked. The neighborhood started to look less like a sterile showroom and more like a place where actual human beings lived. They even offered to pay for a proper restoration of my grandfather's gravesite. I thanked them but politely declined. That was my family's duty. With David's help, we had become unlikely friends through the ordeal. I reset the old headstone. We cleaned it, built a low, respectful fieldstone wall around the small family plot, and planted a new oak sapling beside the old one. The new HOA, as a gesture of goodwill, officially deeded the disputed quarter-acre back to me for $1, clearing up any ambiguity in the public record forever. They replaced the aggressive, "No trespassing" signs with a simple, elegant plaque on the new boundary line that read, "In memory of the founders of this land. Please respect this private cemetery." I finally found the peace I had been looking for. It wasn't the passive, quiet peace of solitude I had originally envisioned. It was an earned peace, a peace forged in conflict and secured by justice. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evening, watching the fireflies dance over my grandfather's resting place. The sounds from Serenity Meadows are different now. I hear children laughing, the distant music of a backyard barbecue, the friendly chatter of neighbors. The beige houses don't seem so soulless anymore. They're just homes, filled with people who are finally free to live in them. I came here to be left alone, to hide from the world. But the world followed me, bringing its ugliness and greed right to my door. In defending my small patch of earth, I had inadvertently liberated an entire community. I had protected my grandfather's legacy and, in doing so, had started to build a new one of my own. I learned that a foundation isn't just something you build with concrete and steel. It's built of memory, of history, of the lines you draw in the sand and refuse to let anyone cross. Brenda thought my foundation was a dusty old map and a forgotten rock. She never realized it was anchored in something far deeper, something she could never bulldoze. It was anchored in love, and it was built to last.